book is called Shemot, which means names, just because it starts with the names of the tribes. And really, I don't know why it's not called the Exodus or Yitziat Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt or whatever. But I guess it's not just that. There's also in this book the Revelation, the Ten Commandments, and then many of the laws and experiences of the Israelites. But this is our foundational, up until now, basically the story of the Jewish people has been about a family. It's been about one family. It's been about, well, there's the pre-family, which is the creation story and the Noah story, but in a way that, like, God decides, it's interesting. Well, I tried with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and it didn't work. And then the whole society didn't work. This is, the mythology. And so God decided to focus on one family or one couple, really. It's Abraham and Sarah, and they start, so it starts from there. And really the whole book of Genesis, which means, the birthing, the coming, the origin, is about this family and their struggles and their problems, and they're overcoming them. And at the end of the book of Genesis, actually, ironically, the family moves out of the promised land, Canaan, and moves to Egypt. And they move to Egypt because there's this terrible famine, as we know, and because of the way they treated Joseph, he became second in command and stored all the food, and he brings his family to Egypt so that they can survive the starvation and everything. And interestingly, they never go home. They could have gone home. We don't ever talk about it, but they didn't have to stay in Egypt after the famine ended. I mean, they were there for, quite a while. But it was comfortable, and it was, I guess they were prosperous. They were doing well. It reminds me actually of a very heartbreaking story about my girlfriend's father. His family was very wealthy, and they lived in Poland. And her father was always a Zionist. And so in the 30s, he went to Palestine. It wasn't Israel yet. And, it was pretty terrible and swampy and whatever, but they were building a Jewish state. And he moved there, and he was a young guy, in his 20s. And his family, his sisters, his parents came to visit, and they thought it was so primitive. They could never live there. So they went back to their wealthy life in Warsaw, and they all ended up being killed. So, I mean, we really don't know. Sometimes the choices are so arbitrary. These Israelites decided to stay. So now we jump to, when they came, Joseph and Pharaoh were, very close. There was a lot of mutual respect and honor. But now time has passed, and the Israelites have become slaves. So let's start looking at the story. And again, interestingly, it focuses on a family. Again, it focuses on one family, which says a lot about how one individual or one family or a small group can make a difference, because we're going to talk about Moses's family that basically ended up redeeming all of the people because of what his mother did, that she took this chance. So let me share. First, I have to do share. Oh, wait, Penina. Oh, my God, Penina's coming in. Nice to see her. And I'm going to share. And here we go. And I'm going to share. Whoops. Okay.
Rabbi, just before you start, while Penina's coming in,
Yeah.
I just read something that included in the names is the name of God. When he says, I will be what I will be, it's also in this chapter.
That's right. Yeah, I'll share. Oh, yeah. Hopefully we'll get to that.
Okay.
Absolutely. Oh, excuse me. Let me call declined.
And
okay.
Okay.
No. Yeah. What did you want to say?
And then the other thing is there's some caveat about feeling well off and well-being and prosperity, because you often find that's the situation that can also not lead to disaster, but not recognizing potential disaster when it hits you. I mean, the Jews in Europe,
Yeah, but it's also like this idea that it's not mentioned at all, but assimilation. Usually,
Yeah,
most Jews, when they assimilate, they try to become like their country, but they're often separated anyway, no matter what they do. So why don't you start reading, Susan?
oh, sure. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt.
Okay, so that's who moved with their children and grandchildren and wives and slaves and servants in their households. So it was a large group that came in. Well, not that large, 70. Started with 70. Okay, keep going.
So then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them.
So the
Yeah.
word strong, I want to get my Tanakh. Um, what do we think that means?
Well, it can have a physical dimension. It could also have a moral dimension. It also could have an emotional dimension.
Or an
An
economic
economic, yeah.
dimension also is what I'm
Right.
thinking. I'm going to just look at and but the Israelites. Okay, so this is it's very hard for me to find the right translation of the Torah. When I go to Chabad, they actually now reinterpret it and change the meaning for what they want, and they add words and all kinds of things. So I don't like that. This is called the New Standard Translation. But the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, I cannot get online. This is the Eitz Chaim one. But they say but the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. It doesn't say that they were strong. It just says they increased. Vayirbu. It's a completely wrong translation. Vayirbu comes from harbe, which means a lot. And they, vayatzmu. Oh, ma'od. Oh, it's an interesting word. It's like they were established, they were strong, but not in a physical way, but they were a strong community in a way, is what they're saying. So they were, and the rabbis say that they kept Judaism to some degree, that they kept their Hebrew names, they tried to practice what they knew, but this is where they were at this point. Okay. Cindy, you have your hand up? Whoops. What happened?
The women's commentary said the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly.
Increased, not were strong, but yeah, exactly. They grew as a community. They became more and more people. Okay. So far, so good. Nothing wrong yet. Okay. Cindy.
Then Joseph died, and
No, now there arose.
now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land."
Okay, in the Eitz Chaim, it says the Israelites are much too numerous for us. It doesn't say too mighty at all. That's interesting. Okay, so what was their fear, and do you think it's reasonable or rational, or why would they think that? Do we have that feeling? Or what is it about? What was their actual fear, and why would they think that? Hi, Panina. Nice to see you. Yes.
I,
What would you like to
I,
say?
I have one word that you were debating. Vayatzmu means that they were becoming very strong.
Very strong.
Yes. Yeah.
But
That's Vayatzmu. It means that they inquired. They inquired a lot of strength.
acquired.
I
Yeah, but
they
it's not
don't
like
tell us in.
Hazak. It's not like
No,
Hazak.
no. It's the word vayatzmu that you were asking, and
I
that
know,
word means that they became strong because of their also numbers.
by their numbers. Right,
Right.
right. Okay. So what do we understand that Pharaoh's fear was?
That they're
And
going to overcome him. That they
but
would be.
why would they think that?
Why? Why
They're
did
not
nations?
more than the Egyptians, that's for sure.
Well, why? First of all, they had a lot of slaves from other countries, so you never know which one these people are going to go. Second, everybody who is in power is worried about the amount of people that believe in them or not. You'll see today in every country. That's why you have
Okay,
voting.
but so what's interesting is even though they had lived in Egypt for quite a while, we don't know, hundreds of years,
The
they
fear of
still were
Pharaoh
not
was the same
considered,
fear.
they still were not considered Egyptian or
Exactly.
citizens.
Or even
They,
if they considered Egyptian, monarchies were sometimes overthrown by their own people.
right, but if you're going to separate a population and suddenly say, "Oh my God, I mean, it seems like it couldn't have just been physical numbers. They must have had some kind of other economic power, intellectual power, or whatever, or that they are just extremely loyal to each other, or separate. I mean, it's interesting. Jews are still that way. We're still like, we have our community and we don't totally always, you know, assimilate.
I
Whatever it
think
was.
I think this is why the voting system was invented.
Okay, I have another possible question. I mean, in history, in European history, since this time, when Jews became very economic wealthy, let's just say that in societies, the kings would suddenly declare them enemies and take all their riches and all their property and all
Okay.
their
That's what happened with
possessions.
the Inquisition.
Right. So I'm wondering if Pharaoh was coveting some of their wealth, their property, their whatever they had,
This
their
just reminds me of Hitler too much.
Sure.
The
well,
Jews were
way
getting too
before Hitler.
powerful.
Before Hitler, I mean, the Spanish Inquisition, or all in the Middle Ages, the medieval times, they would kick the Jews out. It wasn't just the Spanish Inquisition. England exiled the Jews, and you had to leave all of your wealth behind. So I wonder if it's the similar, totally wondering, mentality of like, oh, they're too many. We need to take everything from them and enslave them. Therefore, they lose all their property. And where would it go? To the crown, to the pharaoh. I'm wondering.
I think you can add another dimension. I think that's a salient one that you mentioned as well, but there's also a fear of being overtaken by the religion. Jews weren't considering Pharaoh a god, and Pharaoh considered himself a god, as did his priests whom he protected. So you have an element of theory and belief.
Yeah, apostasy. These people don't recognize, so they're a threat because that intellectual idea could spread.
Exactly.
Talking about the one God and not Pharaoh and the gods could be, that's interesting. It's interesting. Okay, so anybody have any questions or comments?
Well,
Yes,
yeah.
Fred.
Can we go back to the text? Because what the text says, can you put the text back
Yes,
up
I
so that we
will.
can see
Absolutely.
that? What the text says is that the Egyptians were afraid that the Israelites would join with their enemies.
Right.
Where is that?
Here, right
Yeah.
here.
So if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Now, I'm not sure of what the escape from the land is as if they were captives. So that's a bit of a puzzle.
Okay, so now in Hebrew, it says Va'ala min haaretz, which means rise from the ground. As so interesting. It could mean escape. It could mean go away from the land. It could also mean uprise, like an uprising. It's the same
Mhm.
word in Hebrew. Allah, which
So
is like aliyah, is like going up to the Torah. And also that's when you make aliyah, it's the same route. You go to Israel. So they're saying they could they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground, which I think means uprise, rise from the ground.
seditious behavior.
Oh, here's interesting. Eitz Chaim, which I love, says something completely different, Brad. I love that you asked this. The literal meaning of the Hebrew may come from the forgotten idiom that means to rise from a lowly state or to gain ascendancy over. So it may mean like they'll rise up and rule us, is another possibility. So that's interesting. Okay. So why don't you read, Brad? Therefore,
Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel.
they came to dread the people of Israel. So um, they just, no matter what they did, they multiplied, which I don't know if that's interesting that, whatever happened, they continued to have children, they continued to have families, they continued, even though they were slaves. So continue, Brad.
So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
Okay. So this suddenly is a huge, we know the story. This is nothing new, but it's like a big downfall from where they were to, and if we think about, I don't know how quickly it happened, but we think about the Nuremberg laws and how that changed the Jewish situation from, part of the society, and then they started banning them from all kinds of things, taking things away from them. Ultimately, they became not just slaves, but murdered, but they put them in slave camps, always saying that they were the threat. They were the threat, and the
But
same thing with the Egyptians. Yeah.
But because the threat is in their numbers, and that's what's repeated again and again, is this issue of this increasing population. There's a dehumanizing aspect going on here. It's almost as if they were animals who are just populating, fornicating and reproducing and because the entire focus is on their numbers.
I agree with you. And actually, that mentality we're going to see is what the midwives use to explain something to Pharaoh that we're going to read right now. So, Merle, why don't you read? Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives. Right
Then
there.
the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it's a daughter, she shall live.
Keep
But the
going.
mid but the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew strong.
Okay, so the commentaries say what the midwives were actually saying to Pharaoh. First of all, Pharaoh, there was an implication he didn't really have much contact with the Hebrew slaves. It's not like there were house slaves or whatever. He didn't have contact with Hebrew slaves. And they said, well, the Hebrew women are like animals. They give birth so fast before we even get there. So there's nothing we can do, which was a lie. But because Pharaoh was not familiar with Hebrew women, he believed it. You're right. There is a dehumanization here. But let's go back to this idea of the midwives feared God. So in Hebrew, it says, I want to use the word they used, and the midwives, okay, but the midwives feared God. Vateren hamildot et ha-Elohim. So this is the Elohim, not Adonai. We really don't hear about Adonai until the burning bush. So there's like two words for God. Elohim is more generic, I would say at this point, meaning the God of the Hebrews, not God, are their God, not necessarily the only God, but they feared, or the Hebrew gods, and they didn't do it. But why do you think these women cared about the Hebrew God, or why do you think, they didn't obey Pharaoh? And don't forget, what's interesting is, as Susan pointed out, Pharaoh was a god. So they're defying one God to fear a different God. So why would you think that would be the case? Panina.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, why are we going so far? Why aren't we looking at what happened here in the United States during the slavery? The country was fighting one against each other in order to uphold or get rid of principles that were human principles. And if you look at the way that the slaves were treated here, it was even worse of what was happening during the Pharaoh time.
Well, I'm asking, why do you think these women didn't do that?
Because of the fear of God, because some people are more aware of human instincts and women needs than others. And as women, for sure, they can feel more than what the men do, because they are the ones who give the birth and see the kids born and hold them in their arms and feed them and nurture them. And it's not so easy for a woman to give up her child. I think it's harder than a man, let's put it this way, because she's the one who goes through this whole experiment or experience of having this child and having him hold him and nurture him and feed him and see him grown and teach him right from wrong and so forth and so forth and so forth. So and we have been presidents in the United States who had them as wives and had children with them. So it's like, depends on the generation and how they look at it, and to the point where we went into a civil war.
Okay,
So you got it. You got it today. I mean, in our lives, we don't have to go that far as over there.
I agree, but we're looking at this text, and what is interesting also, there's this controversy, the way the Hebrew is used. Is it Hebrew midwives in Egypt, or are they Egyptian midwives?
I think as far as what nature was doing, I don't think that the separation was really important. I think the only thing that was important was here the human feeling to another human being.
Yes,
and the fact that the Pharaoh was a king was like an effect that was.
But there's a much bigger defiance and breaking of the law if you're an Egyptian and you're breaking the law and you're saving the babies, as opposed to, and they talked about how could just two midwives deliver all these children, and they said they were the the heads of all the midwives. But basically, what we know is these two women, Shiphrah and Puah, which the rabbis like to say were actually Miriam and Yocheved, Moses' sister and mother, but I don't know why they would take away the credit. And this is also the first instance of civil disobedience in the Torah. And it's by these two workers, these two lowly women who say, no, we're not going to destroy these babies. We're even going to lie to the Pharaoh in order to save these children. They're quite heroic. And we see a number of heroic women in this story. Ben, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Rabbi. Going back to your question, I just rewind. Why did they? I think the midwife women may have been Jews, or I think you've kind of answered it already. That why would they disobey? Because their God was a different God than the Pharaoh.
Okay, so there's the way the Hebrew is, you can't tell who if they're you think they were Hebrew midwives.
Possibly, or certainly sympathetic. The second thing, and I say this with all due respect to everybody here, but I strongly disagree with some comments about only women can be nurturing, or I'm really shorthanding it. I'm a single dad, and I raised a daughter who's now a young woman, and I just am offended when people feel that men cannot be nurturing as well. So I just say that as a general personal comment.
Okay, well, first of all, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it's obvious that you would be a wonderful and nurturing father. I think what Penina was implying is that when you're the ones actually holding, they sat on a birth stool. When women gave birth there, they literally sat and squatted on this stool. We've seen this ancient stool, which had a hole in the center. Like they sat on it, they bared down, and the baby came through the hole right into the midwife's hands through the hole. And I guess if they're...
And Rabbi, I'm going to stop here, but I was at the birth of my daughter, and I held her immediately.
All right, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. You're absolutely right.
I will always challenge that.
You're right. You're
with the greatest respect.
And I respect you, and I back down, and you're right, and I'm wrong, and I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. I think you're right. If you've held a newborn in your arms, you could never do this. Man or woman, anyone who is a loving parent or even a loving human being. So, okay. So, Susan, and I'm sorry, and you're right, Ben, you're absolutely right. Sometimes, one's feminist eyes can go too far, and I apologize for that.
And I want all to know that I am also a strong feminist and believer in women's rights. As you can see behind me, excuse me, my late mother served in the United States Army, so she was an unusual, strong woman as well.
Amazing, amazing.
So I have
How old's your daughter now?
She's the young age of 34 years old.
Oh my God, you don't look old enough to have a 34-year-old daughter.
I've had a lot of work, Rabbi.
I need the name of your doctor. Okay. Susan.
So yeah, I have a 54-year-old daughter. So his birthday I gave, but witnessed it. Anyway, what I think that as Chaim emphasizes is the fear of God. That and I always think of that earlier before when Abraham and when Isaac went to Egypt or to Canaan with Abimelech there, they said there's no fear of God in this place, meaning a moral standard. And that's one of the reasons that they took the extreme measure of asking their wives to pose as their sisters. So the fear of God, I think, is important in this passage. That was stated here as the reason that they disobeyed God. Not that they loved children or whatever, but they feared that there were no moral standards there. But then
Go ahead.
The other thing is you had mentioned, we talked about this in Women's Torah, that there was a midwife society, a gathering of women who delivered. And they could have been, in this case, the question were they Hebrews who slaves who acted as midwives, or were they Egyptians who acted? And it could be both. I mean, they made it ambiguous, but they were midwives. And I also think it's interesting, they identify Shiphrah and Puah, as the rabbis do in the Midrash, as Miriam. And not Yocheved.
Yeah, Yocheved.
Yocheved. No, Yocheved is the what? Yeah, yeah. Okay, Zipporah is the one. Yeah, which could also be. I mean, they could have been midwives for all we know. So,
Right, but don't you think if they were Hebrew slaves who disobeyed, they just would have been
they
killed?
still disobeyed, yeah, but
That would have been killed, as opposed to, I love the idea that these women were Egyptian. I love the idea. And that there's a higher morality. There is a standard or of morality that is, you don't destroy babies and whoever tells you what to do. And they didn't fear the god Pharaoh. They feared
yeah.
whatever that is. Just one second, Donna. I want to ask people, do you think, I mean, I don't think people fear God anymore the way these ancient people did. Do you think that it's more difficult to be moral with no fear of God in the world? I mean, why do people, why are they good? Why do they follow a moral law if they don't fear God? And a lot of people no longer fear God, and including a lot of Jews don't
Yeah,
fear God. They don't fear God. Um, and do you think it's harder to be moral when you don't fear God? Douglas,
Yeah,
you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
there
Okay.
we go.
Okay.
Um, no, I don't think people fear God as much as they did before, because in the ancient world, the natural occurrences, nature was mystic thing, and so now we have science that explains everything. So it's not God, and I think of all the people who have lost their homes, and the fear of God, it's the same question all of the Jews of the Holocaust had to deal with, what happened? Anyway,
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but it's like certainly it's the oppressors that don't fear God at all. I mean, they didn't, and so I'm saying, do you think it's harder to have a moral world when there's no fear of God or there's less fear of God? There are people who still have a fear of God, but do you think there's it's harder to be moral, or do you think that humanity can find some other rational
I
reason
read a
for
long time ago in some book that without some religious training, people do not have any morals. The only way that they can get morals is from their parents. And if their parents have no morals, then that's why I guess, I don't know, hate to be prejudiced, but maybe that's why crime runs in families, because the kids don't get the moral training from their parents.
Okay, do other people have thoughts about that? Abby?
Yeah, I hope I don't lose you. There was somebody I studied about, Kohlberg, who talked about moral development, and the first stage is it's like children, punishing them. So it's like fearing God or fearing to be punished for something. And then each stage, you're at a higher level of morality, where the last level of morality is like, is it okay? They use this, is it okay to steal the medicine if you need that medicine, to be cured? So we evolve, so we're looking at people that were, the beginning of finding laws and things. And so if that's very basic of, punishment, like a child, you know what I'm saying? And as
Right,
you
but
get
I
older, you have
wonder, do you
harder.
think that people are born with an inherent morality or everything is relative? Because I've read studies about babies who are extremely compassionate and caring, and when someone is in pain, they have empathy and whatever. And it seems like, do we
Well, I think it's a combination.
unlearn it, or is it all relative to what is morality?
May I speak now?
Yes, Donna.
I want to say, you know my story. I'm not going to talk about it. I have a heart for everybody, and I feel their pain. I think it's the opposite than what society says. Because when my story goes public, it will with my man. People will go, "Oh my God, she went through that." But you know what? Everybody's going through so much. But I feel the pain, and I have no criminal record. I've never hurt nobody, and my daughter wants me to sing. My future stepdaughter plays piano, healing melodies. I have been through so much of a Holocaust myself, but it's not about me. I want to be an example of loving kindness and forgiveness and compassion. And I believe that everything happened to me because Moshe predicted the uprising of anti-Semitism before he died. You know the story with the kids. But they're now proud. And yes, I love them. I did what I had to do at that time because I was falling apart and depressed. I lost my husband, wanted to die.
Okay.
35 years ago. Now look at what's going on. It's like
Okay,
I had
but
a,
we're not talking about that right
I
now.
know, but I do feel the morality is given at birth. I believe that you're born with it. You're either good or you're bad.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
other thoughts about, is it harder to be moral without awe or fear of God, or fear of some kind of retribution, or is there some inherent morality that we call fear of God, but it's in us? I'm curious. Panina,
Okay, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, I think people got to be so busy in order to maintain their own lives in order, as if just to make a living, that they invented this thing that's called voting. And I think today, everything that they need to solve a problem to goes to a vote.
Yeah, but
And
what is it? I'm asking about morality
the
and
morality is taking a second seat to the vote. And
okay.
and they can tell you that it's because of that they are doing the voting, but it turns out in the end that the voting itself is going to be very personal to each person, and it may take a different direction of what they really thought it's going to happen.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that's the conditions of the society at the time where the voting is taken. It's going to dictate of actually why the voting is being done and for what, and even the solution.
Okay, but we're
So
not talking about that. And I
I
would say
know that.
I
I
want to
know
move
that.
on. I want to
I
move
know
on,
that.
but I want to say in Judaism,
Right.
I look at the Talmud, they
Yes.
absolutely do not think that you can be moral on your own because there is so many times in
Yes.
teachings about how to behave and when to
Yes.
behave and what to do. It's like they go down to the very nitty gritty of if you find something in the street that's lost, is it yours or do you have to return it? And then they debate, well, it depends how far away the thing that was dropped from is, whether it's public domain or private domain. So in Judaism, the rabbis, the writers, the creators of Judaism said, we need a fence, we need rules, we need mitzvahs, we need commandments and order, and here's how to live it. They did not think that humanity or that inherently without it, we could live a productive, loving, supportive life. So Judaism does not just say, your soul will take you to where you're going. They give you even ways to raise your soul. And in Judaism, it's all about action, as we know, and righteous action. So the fact that these midwives in this ancient story, we don't know what kind of education or learning they had, but that they just knew it's wrong and we're not doing it. That's why we hold them up as sort of, heroic women, people, nurturers of their time. Okay, so then, but Pharaoh was not, and interestingly, the more Pharaoh was thwarted, which is could be human nature, the harsher he became, the crueler he became. When he, it kind of reminds me of Putin for some reason, or Hitler or whatever. Like the harsher, the more, there was no reasoning, no reasoning. So, okay, let's go back to, where is it? Share the text. Wait, share. Okay, Ben, do you want to read when I get it there? Okay.
I'll give it a shot, Rabbi. Thank you. What number, please?
All right. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. So they just became more. Continue. And because
And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.
Okay,
Now,
and I just want to say, some commentaries say that the families that the midwives gave were like, what was it? Oh, I remember it. It was like families among the Jews. It was like the Kohanim. It was like high level people, or even people that were, the Hebrew women were not like, let me see. They just said that they were like blessed families, wealthy families, and maybe, even I thought they were the Kohanim, but that doesn't make sense. But they were something very high. Okay, so now they're saying kill the sons. We know why, because they're going to grow up to be the fighters.
soldiers. Yeah.
Okay, now this is a very interesting. Go ahead.
Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when he saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months.
Okay, so in the Eitz Chaim, they say when she saw how beautiful he was, how beautiful. So we never think of Moses. We think of him as this old guy. He was a beautiful child, and actually, according to the Midrash, he had a name which was Tuvia, was Moses's name by his mother. Tuvia means, goodness from God, or goodness of God, or God is good. Tuvia. But what's interesting is that it says this man married a woman and had a child, but we know that Moses had two older siblings. So what do you mean he married her and had a child? What about Aaron and Miriam?
Half siblings?
So the Midrash tries to explain this, and what they say is that when Pharaoh made the decree to kill all the baby boys and kill all the children, the Hebrews decided to no longer have children, and they divorced their wives. And they said, we're not going to have any children because they're going to kill them. And then Miriam, who was the prophetess, this was her first showing of being a prophet. Miriam came to her father and said, Pharaoh is going to kill all the boys, but you're going to kill all the Jewish people. If you all stop having children, we're all going to die out. And she pleaded with her father not to do this, and he agreed, and he remarried his wife, took her back, and had this baby, this 3-month-old baby, who was a beautiful child. So that's what the Midrash says what happened. And now she's hid him for 3 months, which was probably really hard because, they're looking for newborn babies. So the baby was able to survive 3 months, and then she could no longer hide him. So what happened? Pnina, do you want to read?
Where is it?
When she could hide him no longer.
Yeah. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes.
Yeah.
And dabbed it with bitumen. I don't know what it is.
It's like, mud and some kind of clay. Okay. And she made a basket.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while a young woman walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children."
Okay,
And
so
his
how
sister,
did she know? Because the baby was circumcised, so she would have known it was a boy. And here's a question. Why is Pharaoh's daughter in the river, in the Nile River, as opposed to in some beautiful bath in her palace? Why is she bathing in with crocodiles and reeds and everything in the river? So there, you have an idea? Okay, Panina.
this is this point exactly why she was there. We don't know if that area had the crocodile stuff, but we do know that I mentioned that before, that there was a belief that two bodies of water, that it was called the Emuna Elis, that two bodies of water, of sweet water, will come together. A god will appear or will be a part of it. The viewing of a godly figure. And I think the word Moshe came to emphasize it, that he was drawn out of the river. And I think that that was a part of his magnetism when he grew up or while he stayed at the Pharaoh's house, that he was a godly figure because he came out of the two bodies of water that came together, sweet water. He was like the I would say, the result of the Emuna Elis belief. And I think that a part of his charm of him drawing the people to follow him was also depending on his name and of his circumstances of where he was found. He
I
was
think that's
found where
very interesting. That's very interesting.
the bodies of water that was called the Emuna Elis, that was the togetherness of where two bodies of water, sweet waters, will found each other, or one of them would be. And a godly figure will appear out of this reunion
Okay.
of water.
Okay. So that's I think that's very interesting that there's some kind of symbolism of a god
And that's why his name,
arising.
Moshe, wants
Moshe,
definitely tell the people that he was taken out of the water.
taken out of the water and in some way holy or miraculous or whatever.
Exactly.
I also
Exactly.
read a midrash that Pharaoh's daughter was very against her father's decree to kill all the babies, and that she stood in the water actually as a protest, and perhaps she was looking to save babies, but she defied her father, and she's also given a name, Batya, which means daughter of God, and later on they say that she went on the Exodus with the Israelite people herself. And so there are 5 women who basically saved Moses. Shifra and Puah, because they didn't, kill babies that were born. Then Miriam and Yocheved, his sister and mother, and then Batya, or his adopted mother. So
And
Moses,
then many thousands of people that he took out of there.
yes, yes. Okay. So then we know the story where Miriam comes to her. The girl went and said, "Oh, so Miriam comes and says, do you need a midwife or do you need a nursemaid to nurse the baby?" And so he was taken back to his own mother, and he was raised by her until he was weaned, and she named him Moses. And he became Pharaoh's son, Pharaoh's daughter's son. Okay, so let me ask you something which is not ever clear. Do you think Moses knew that he was Hebrew?
Yes, yes.
Somebody else. Do somebody else think that he knew he was a Hebrew? What do you think?
I think he did know after he found the cloth, but I'm not sure about beforehand.
But I mean, growing up, Ben.
I think not, Rabbi, because when fast forward when he saw the burning bush, he was going to say to God, "Why me? I'm nothing special." So I would think no.
Well, he didn't know he was a Hebrew by then. I think he knew by then he was
Oh,
a
okay.
Hebrew
Sorry.
because
I,
he he saw a taskmaster killing.
Yes.
And then he ran away because he tried to break it up between two Hebrews afterwards. And they said, oh, are you going to kill us like you killed the other guy? And he knew that he was going to be accused of murder, and he ran away. Rebecca.
Well, he was circumcised. You know, boys play together.
So he would have known he was a Hebrew from the beginning. That's interesting. Susan.
Yeah, so your question was, do you think that Moses knew he was a Hebrew? Is that?
Yeah.
Well, he was nursed by his mother for 3 years, and he was in the house. So now that's very young. How much of us remember 3-year-olds? But there are certain things that I remember from those very early years. Not a lot. I don't remember everything yesterday, but yeah, but that may have had some impact on him. And you know, I just thought of this. Miriam may have had access to the palace for whatever reasons that, or Yocheved for that matter, after 3 years. But I'd say the very early years.
Okay, yet he didn't practice any kind of Jewish anything that we know of, because he went in, then he became with a Midianite family. Cindy.
I'm just thinking that maybe he wondered why he didn't have a father and might have asked one day.
That's true. I mean, or maybe Bacha told him that I took you out of the river, and so that he knew who he was. So he always had this. I often have thought one of the reasons Moses was chosen, this is a logical reason, I don't know, because he straddled both societies. He straddled the Hebrew society and the Egyptian society. He could speak Egyptian. He could speak, he was educated and polished like an Egyptian, but he was a Hebrew, so he was connected to the Jew. They weren't called Jews yet.
But did Pharaoh treat him equally to his other grandchildren?
We have no idea, do we? We don't know.
Merle has her hand up.
Merle.
I think he knew just because of what he had been told. And his ability to straddle the communities was something that he figured out on his own.
But at the same time, he also, I was thinking about this too. He had a speech impediment. He had some kind of a speech problem. And according to the Midrash, the reason he had the speech impediment is because Pharaoh's magician said this Hebrew baby is going to bring you down and you should kill him immediately. They foresaw that. And they gave the baby a test where they put a plate of burning coals in front of him and a plate of the Pharaoh's crown and jewels. And they said, if he picks the coals, he should live. If he picks the jewels, he should be killed. And this is the Midrash. He, of course, went for the jewels because they're beautiful. And an angel pushed his hand over and he burned his finger on the coals and put his hot finger on his tongue. And that's how he got a speech impediment, because the rabbis don't know.
I love you, Susan. There's the angels again.
Right. And, and that, later when God says, go down and talk to my people, he says, I'm slow of speech. I'm not a good speaker. I can't do it. And it's so interesting that our greatest leader and prophet had a disability or an impediment. So unfortunately, it's time to stop. And this story we, could read 1,000,000 times, and there's so much in it. But I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom and stay safe. And I'm glad everyone here. People keep calling me. So I'll see you next time. And if anybody wants to come tonight to Irmis, we're doing Martin Luther King Shabbat. We're having we're having some gospel singers, some soul gospel. They're not.
Wow.
Wish I could be there.
Yeah, I would love to have you.
Sometime in the next few months, we'll be back.
What time does it start, Rabbi? Does it start at 5?
It starts at 6.
Which campus is going to be the country?
Irmis.
Okay.
Is the temple open yet?
See you there. See you there.
No, the temple. Bye. Ben, stay safe.
Thank you.
For everything you do. Thank you.
Love you, Ben. Love you, Brad. Love you.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
If I don't see you.
Thank you.
Whoa.